Most people are EQing wrong. Not because they don't know what the knobs do, but because they don't understand exactly what problems they are trying to solve. And that's the major difference between a mix that sounds professional and a mix that sounds busy, cluttered, like everything is fighting for attention. In this video, you're going to understand EQ at the level most producers never reach. Not just the controls, but the thinking behind it. When to use it, why to use it, and exactly how to use it to improve your music. All right, so here is something that most people don't teach you when they talk about EQ. Every sound you've ever heard, every snare hit, every bass note, every vocal, it's not just one thing. It's actually a collection of different frequencies happening at the same time, all layered on top of one another, all playing simultaneously. When you hit a bass note, you're not just hearing one frequency, you're actually hearing one fundamental note plus a stack of overtone and harmonics that gives that bass its character and texture. Now, EQ lets you reach into that stack of frequencies and make adjustments about which one you want to make louder and which one you want to take down a bit. Now, when you cut frequencies from one sound, all that you're just doing is just making space in that frequency range for another sound to be heard more clearly. And that is simply what EQ is all about, creating space. Keep that in mind. So let's jump over into this example that we have right here. As you can see on top right here, we have the bass. And at the bottom right here, we have a piano sound. And you can see I've gone ahead to take out some of the high-end frequencies from the bass and low-end frequencies from the piano. But if I'm to turn this off, if I'm to turn all the EQs off right here, and then play them without any EQ whatsoever, this is how they sound. Now, when you hear something like this, you can see that there are a whole lot of frequencies that are clashing. If you look over at this section right here, we can see that this section right here just have a whole lot of frequencies playing at the same time. This bass character now has a whole bunch of high-end frequencies that are not that important to the character of the bass itself. Okay, so that is exactly what I did. I removed those unnecessary, unwanted sounds from the bass by using a low pass to take out most of those high-end frequencies. And that is exactly what we have right here. Without this EQ, this is what we have. So all these sounds are unnecessary. When we do this, we take out all those sounds and leave the portion of the bass that are important to the sounds that we are going for. And then the same thing with the piano. If we play this without any EQ, this is how it sounds. Now, if you hear this on its own, it sounds very, very amazing. And if this was the only instrument in our whole mix, we are good. Okay? But because we have a bass right here, and then the bass is also fighting for that same low end space, they tend to clash. Okay, so all we just have to do is just take out a portion of that low end, and we did that by using a high pass filter to remove the low end frequencies that are actually clashing with the bass. And then what I just did again was to boost some of these high end frequencies of the piano so that it can shine more in that sections that the bass isn't available. Okay, so when we put that together, we just get a very, very good blend between these two instruments when no instrument is clashing with another, and it just sounds beautiful together. Now, there are 6 major zones in the frequency spectrum, and every mixing decision you make will happen inside one of the zones. So it's very, very crucial and important that you know these zones. Now, the first zone is the sub bass, and this is from around 20 Hz to 60 Hz. You don't really hear this zone, it is something that you feel. It's that physical pressure in your chest, during a concert, that rumble under the 808. When you add too much character into this section, your mix can become too boomy and it loses definition. Not enough, and it might sound very lightweight. Most of the time, only your kick sub and bass sub should live in this section. Nothing else. Next up, we have the zone 2, which is the bass section, and this is from 60 Hz to 250 Hz. This is the weight and the body of your low end, and this is where the actual tone of the bass lives. That thump of your kick drum, the warmth in the vocal, this zone fills out the mix and gives it mass. But this is also the first place that becomes very muddy when instruments are starting to overlap. So it's very, very delicate and very, very crucial that you understand how this section works and how to, merge instruments together when working in this section. Now in zone 3, we have the low mids, and this is from 250 hertz to 500 hertz. This is actually the most dangerous zone in the whole frequency spectrum. And why is that? Because most of all your instruments always have a character in this section, from the bass to the guitars, to your vocals, to your leads, to your keyboards, to your piano sounds. And what this means is that this section can easily get choked up and filled up very, very fast. When you have too much low mids build up, your mix can sound like there are many people talking in a very, very tiny room. Just sounds so congested and so choked up. So you can't really pick out the sounds very clearly and individually. So it's also very, very crucial that you understand what this section is made up of and how to, navigate and EQ this section when it comes to that. In zone 4, you have the mids, and this is from 500 hertz to 2 kilohertz. This is the core of your mix. Okay, your vocals, your lead guitars, your synths, most of the time they live in this section. This zone carries the melody, the emotion, and the message. Get the mids right and your mix communicates clearly. Get them wrong, and even the loudest mix just sounds like noise. And in zone 5, you have the upper mids, and this is from 2 kilohertz to 6 kilohertz. This is the presence zone. It's what makes a snare cut. It's also the part that makes a vocal feel very forward and very clear. What makes a lead synth grab your attention. But too much in this section, especially around 3 to 4 kilohertz, and it might start to sound very, very harsh and fatiguing to the ears. That is the kind of mix you don't want. The kind that just makes people turn off the music after like 2 minutes, okay? You do not want that. And for the last zone, zone 6, you have the high ends. And this is from between 6 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz. Brightness, shimmer, the open feeling in a professional mix. This is where the hi-hat lives, the sizzle of a synth, the breath of a vocal. A gentle boost in this section to the right elements can make your mix come alive. Too much in this section and it can sound very, very harsh, very, very brittle, and most importantly, sometimes painful at very high volumes. So just know how to balance this out, okay? And make adjustments when necessary. So with these 6 EQ zones that you now know of, don't just watch them, listen to them, and then just pass by. Go over them one by one. Actually, I will need you to go into your mix, go into the mix you've worked on, a professional mix, and see how these zones interact with one another. Mute some zones so that you can actually hear those zones individually and hear how it feels. Okay, the more you familiarize yourself with how this zone sounds, the more you can be able to notice issues and be able to fix them when those times and moments rises. So let's go over the controls that we have to make our EQ possible. And if we look over at the graph right here, you can see we have like a box, and we can see this circle band that we have right here. And this is the parametric EQ2 from Fruity Loops FL Studio. But any parametric EQ plugin will also look very, very similar, so you can still follow along with any EQ plugin that you are quite using. All these individual sections, these points right here, they are called bands. And every band has 4 major controls that you can use to control it. So first of all, we have the up and the down movement, and that controls the volume of the band. Okay, so you can see we have a blue band here. We also have a blue here. So if we move this up and down, we actually control the movement of that band. But as we can move this right here, we can also click and drag inside the spectrum and then move it more freely. All right. But if you want to make precise adjustments, you can do that using this slider right here. And then next up, we have the frequency, and that is the horizontal movement from left to right. If I'm to just take this up a bit, okay, we can move this from left to right, and that is from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Okay, so from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. To control this very precisely, we have this slider right here. As you can see, if we move this down, it just takes it to 20 hertz, and if we move this up, it takes it to 20 kilohertz. Next up, we have the Q, and all this does is it affects how wide or how narrow the EQ is. When we take this down, it just affects a very, very small portion, okay, of frequencies, and it doesn't affect much. But when we take this up, it becomes wider and it now can affect more frequencies. And over here in the frequency spectrum, we can use our middle mouse button, okay, to slide up and down to affect the Q of that particular band that we are working with. And the last but not the least, most important setting that we can make to these bands right here are the EQ shapes and filters. Now, if we move this band up and down, you can see how this looks is quite different from how this one looks. And that is because if you right click here and go to the type, you can see that this one right here is a picking, while this one right here is called the high shelf. These are two different shapes that look different and they do different things and perform different functions. So we have the high shelf, and this just boosts the high end. We can still use our Q to affect how this slope looks like. But most importantly, it takes the high and takes the high lows. So it just affects the high end frequencies. These are the frequencies to the right side of that particular band. And then over here, if we change this to a picking, it does exactly what the picking does. It's like a bell curve. So it just affects a certain frequencies. And then you can, it's actually the most important kind of shape you see in any EQ. All right. So you can just take this up, take this down, use the Q to affect the amount of frequencies you want. And then you can, do that. And then next to that, we have the low shelf. So this is quite the opposite of the high shelf. So instead of affecting things to the high end, it affects things to the low end. So if you move this up, you see that it just takes out everything to the left side of it. So it takes out just the low end frequencies. If I move up, it takes up the lows. And if I move down, it takes down the lows. All right, so that is just something for you to keep in mind. And then next to that, we have the band stop. And as you can see, this just stops a particular frequency range that band is over. Like I've been saying so far, you can still use the Q to affect how much wide of a frequency range this band is going to affect. All right, so if you take this down, you can see that it just affects and stops a small portion of frequencies. But if you widen this out, you can see it can affect a whole lot more frequencies. Next to that, we have the high pass. And all this does is that it just allows the high end frequencies to pass and then removes everything low end. It removes the low end frequencies and then allows the high frequencies to pass. Then above that, we have the band pass. And this does the exact opposite of the band stop by, instead of stopping frequencies, it allows those particular frequencies to pass and then removes every other thing aside those frequencies. So we can still use the Q to affect how much frequencies are allowed to pass. And we can sweep from left to right. And we can increase the Q to allow more frequencies pass and still sweep from left to right. And then last but not the least, we have the low pass. And this simply just allows the low frequencies pass and removes everything that is high end frequencies. All right, so these are the four major settings. There are still a whole lot of other settings, but these four major settings are all you need to get started. All right, so now you know the controls, but knowing controls without knowing the purpose is like knowing how to drive without knowing the destination. You're just going to be wandering up and down, attaining to nothing. So here is the core truth that most EQ tutorials you hear around really miss and skip. When you put together 10, 20, 30 instruments in a session, each one of them has frequencies spread across the spectrum. And these are not just the frequencies that you think of when you hear the instruments, but you have things like the overtone, the harmonics, the low-end rumbles, high-frequency noise, all of this piling on top of each other. Now, the problem isn't that any instrument sounds bad on its own, but the problem is that together, they are all fighting for the same frequencies at the same time. Your bass has a low end, but so does your piano in the lower octaves. Your synth has a lot of mids, so does your vocals. Your hi-hat has presence in the upper mids, but so does your lead synths. When everything overlaps like this, nothing is clear. The bass doesn't hit hard because the piano is clouding that same frequency. The vocal doesn't cut through because the pad is maxing it. The mix sounds loud but not powerful, busy but not full. Now, EQ fixes this by giving each sound its own lane. You strip out the low ends from the piano so that the bass can, own that section. You carve out a pocket in the pad so that the vocals sit forward. You cut out the high noise from the bass so that the hi-hats, have room. The goal is never to make a sound good on its own, but to make them sound good when put together. Now let's get into the actual mixing process. Not just one technique, but a repeatable full system. The step one and the most important step is select sounds that actually fit together. This cannot be overemphasized. Before you even open an EQ, fix the problem at the source. EQ is very, very powerful, but it's not a rescue tool for sounds that fundamentally clash. If your bass and synth pads are both warm, thick, and sitting in the low frequency range, no amount of EQ will make them coexist. You'll just end up fighting the whole session. Sound selection is the first EQ decision that you make. Choose sounds that naturally complement each other. A round, deep bass pairs better with a bright, mid-focused synth. A thick pad works better with a clean, cut-through lead. If the sounds don't fit before the EQ, sit back and make better selections. This alone is going to save you hours. Step 2, listen before you touch anything. Play your mix all the way through and just listen and pay attention to what you are actually hearing. No plugging open, no tweaking, just listening with the question, what bothers me? Is there a mud building up? Is something harsh? Does the bass disappear on certain notes? Is the mix too dense in a specific area? Identify the problems with your ears first, and if you actually need to write them down, please do so. Then now you now go over to the EQ section with a target and not just moving the knobs randomly up and down. Now, in step 3, this is something that you actually need to just get used to. And that is just high passing everything that does not actually need low end. Almost every instrument in your session, from your lead to your synths to your pianos to your vocals to your leads, most of the time they all have low end frequencies that they don't actually need. And this just becomes a distraction to the low ends that are very, very delicate. Like we said earlier, if you remember, the low end is very, very delicate and it can get very, very muddy easily. So when you have all this stacks of small, unnecessary sounds, they tend to build up and they can now become a distraction and start to make your low end feel muddy and boomy and not sounding as clear as it's meant to be. Just do this step in your next mix session and you notice how your low end just starts to brighten up. The bass will hit way much harder because it's actually the only thing that is living down there in that area. Now, the next step, which is step 4, is to identify and remove problem frequencies. So now every instrument always have one frequency or another that is just chaos. All right. So this is where you now listen critically, find out those frequencies, and just take them down. Most people do this by, they boost up the frequencies and then they sweep through the mix. When they find some things that maybe sound very, very harsh, they just take them down. And I used to do that also. I still do that. But a better way is to sometimes, instead of boosting, you actually cut. So when you cut, you listen, you still do the same sweep, but this time you listen around and find sections where the instruments just sound better than it was previously. And you find out that those sections actually have a whole lot of, sometimes some things might not actually sound harsh, but they sound boxy. They sound, I don't know the word to use, but they just sound unclear. They might not be harsh, but they are problem frequencies. So by cutting them, you actually hear those individual sounds and how it brightens up, how it clears out when you actually listen to it by cutting instead of boosting. Now, the next step, which is step 5, is to now start to carve out space for your most important instruments. Once individual tracks are clean, it's time to think about how everything sits together. Pick out the most important instruments, maybe your vocal, your lead, your synth, whatever it is, and ask yourself, is there anything in this mix that is occupying this same frequency range? If your lead synth and your pad synth around the same frequency spectrum, the lead is going to fight to be heard. The best fix in most cases is not just to increase the lead. That just makes it louder, not cleaner. Instead, make a subtle cut in the pad at that exact frequency that the lead sits on. You're not cutting the pad, okay? You're just scooping out a small portion for your lead to live in. This technique as a whole is called EQ carving, and it is one very, very important tool and technique that separates professional mixes from amateur ones. The lead itself sounds more present, not because it's just louder, but because it has its own space. And now the last but not the least is to now start to boost with purples and not just hope. Cuts are like your workhouse, okay, but boosts are like your polish. Just see it that way. Once your mix is clean and organized, certain boosts here and there can just enhance what is already working. But just keep this in mind, okay? Use subtle boosts here and there, most importantly, sometimes wide boosts, so that it sounds more natural and not artificial. Try and listen and then have an intention of what you actually want. And most importantly, A/B test and then see how it sounds, whether you're trying to actually making it better or you're actually making it sound worse. And also, very important, try and also rest your ears from time to time, because sometimes your ears can just get accustomed to a particular sound and in your mind you think it sounds better, but when you rest your ears and come back with fresh ears, it may actually sound not as good as you actually wanted it to be. So resting your ears is actually a very, very good practice that you should actually embark on when you are trying to mix music and get it to sit well. So a very quick example with this is how we combine these 3 different pad sounds together. Okay, so you can see we have 3 different EQs going on. And first, we have this synth sound. Okay, so you can see we took out most of the low end frequencies and allowed the high frequencies to pass, the mid high frequencies. Okay, and then next up we have this pad one over here. So if you notice, we took down a bit of the high end frequencies over here, allowed the mid frequencies pass through. All right, and then lastly we have this pad two. And as you can see, we have also taken down a portion of the mid frequencies and actually boosted a portion of the high frequencies to make it shine more. So now if we turn off every frequency that we have going on right here so that we can actually hear how these three sound together without any EQ whatsoever going on. So now you can hear that there are some very important frequencies that are just being drowned in the bunch of sounds that are going on. So that is what we did with each of all these EQ choices that we made. Every EQ that you see here had a purpose. First things first, you can see there is a low end take on everything because as you can see, there are some low end frequencies in all these instruments that are quite not necessary. All right, so you can see some of them have low end frequencies that we actually do not need. So just go ahead and take them out. Even on this synth right here, there were some frequencies that were taken. Most of all these frequencies right here were gone because those small frequencies that you saw there were going to actually be affecting the fundamental frequencies of these other parts that are being made right here. So we took them out and then we just left these high end portions to cut through. And that is all. That is all we technically did for that. Okay, not much. Then on the second pad, first things first, we took out a portion of the low end frequencies, okay? Just to remove anything that might want to show forth at some point. And then next up, what we did is we boosted a bit of that low end, as you can see. We took that up a bit, okay? Just a little bit. And then lastly, most importantly, we took down these high end frequencies. And the reason we took this down, it has a purpose. Like I said, everything has a purpose. It's because of the influence of this second pad. If this second pad never existed in this whole session, we would probably never need to take this down. But because of, I wanted to retain this section of frequencies right here, this high end sound, I wanted it to comfort. So as you can see, first of all, we boosted right here. Okay. Then we also took down this portion right here, which you can see is the main portion of where we took up at this place. So we took this down. And then also the same thing, we took out the low end frequencies. I think this one actually had a bit of low end sounds that we're cutting through. So yeah, so you can see all this here, unnecessary, very, very unnecessary. Take them out entirely. So now we took this down, which is the part where this pad went up. We boosted this part up, which is the part where this pad came down. And then we just retained the entire highs for this. On the core base level, these three actually work together. Okay, so just boosting things here and there just creates pockets of spaces, and then it's just like a puzzle that you're kind of put together. Make cuts here, make boosts here, remove frequencies from here, and then everything just starts to fit into its own space by default. They might not sound very good on their own. Okay, it might sound very, very empty and harsh and not make sense. But when you play them together with everything, they come together and start to make the foundation of the whole music. So let me be straight with you, all right? There are AQ habits that you do that are just silently ruining your mixes. So I'm just going to mention a few of them so that you be aware when next you're trying to do them. EQ habits number one, EQing and solo. If you are used to soloing a track, EQing it to perfection, and then on soloing it, you are going about things the wrong way. EQ itself in general is a very relational tool. You are not trying to work with just one instrument. You are working with a bunch of instruments and trying to put them together. So anytime you are trying to isolate one particular instrument and get it to perfectly sound good, when you play it with other instruments, it will in most cases not sound as perfect as you actually intended it to be. So I'm not against EQing in solo, but I'm against EQing in solo to perfection. They are two different things because sometimes you have to isolate an instrument to be able to hear things clearly, to be able to hear some frequencies, some actually very, very subtle mods here and there. But most of the times, when you have gotten it to a certain point, you now add other instruments because you are trying to get the mix to sit well together and not sit well on their own. So EQing in solo to perfection is a very, very wrong mindset that you should change. Mistake number two is boosting what a cut should fix. There are two ways you can EQ. You can either boost a frequency or you can cut a frequency. And in most cases, cutting frequencies down usually does a cleaner job than boosting frequencies. It's just very simple. Let's say, for example, you have a bowl of water and you wanted to remove water from the bowl. Well, you can just take out some water. It's that simple. Okay. But when you're planning on adding water to the bowl, well, you now have to now find, okay, where can I now get the water that I'm adding to this bowl? It's that simple with EQ. Okay. When you are increasing the frequency, you're actually adding to that frequencies from what wasn't there, from what doesn't exist. It's like increasing the volume to a particular point where the volume starts clipping. It's always cleaner when you are making cuts instead of boosting frequencies. And now the last but not the least habit is actually very, very similar to the EQing in solo, is ignoring the relationship between instruments. Like I said, when EQing in solo, you can't just EQ one track and then ignore how it affects other tracks. When you're EQing, you have to be aware that, okay, you're not just EQing an instrument for it to stand alone, or you're EQing an instrument for it to fit well with the other instruments that come along with it. Your EQ decisions need to amount for the whole picture. Every cut or every boost you make creates space or competition for another. So always be aware of this and think of how each instrument interrelates with one another. Now, everything we've gone over so far will be actually very, very useless if your ears can't understand what it's actually listening to. Most producers will skip ear training because it's kind of very abstract. But it is the key difference between spending 3 hours on a mix and getting nowhere, and 45 minutes on a mix and getting everything exactly how you want it to be. So I'm just going to give you one practice that you can do that can help you, get accustomed to hear EQ better. And it is very, very simple. All you need to do is just load up a song into your DAW and then put up an EQ on the master channel and then start to move the knobs here and there and hear how the sounds changes. Your ears get accustomed to what knobs move what, and your ears, most importantly, get accustomed to how those EQ section sounds. I went over this during the section where we talked about the zones, and I'm going over it again because it is that important. Pull up a section, cut a boost at some point, and see how it affects the entire mix. Most importantly, like I said, do it for a song, but you can also do this for your individual instruments. And it would change dramatically how you hear mixes. Because sometimes when you just hear a particular sound, you just immediately just know what frequency is actually causing the problem, and you just immediately start to take it down without wasting much time. So that is how you get faster and more accustomed with hearing EQ problems and hearing EQ fixes and how to make them better. EQ is one of those topics that feel overwhelming until suddenly it doesn't. And the moment it clicks for you, every mix you make onwards just starts to sound very, very different. More intentional and more professional. But trust me, it will not click from watching videos, okay? It has to click by you taking actions and doing something with it. So here is an assignment I'm going to leave you with. Take out an old project that you've worked on and then listen to the mix sections, go into the in-depth instruments, and then start to listen to how the instruments relate with one another. Clean up the mix, hear instruments that clash, duck them down, remove the low end, and everything that we've covered in this video so far, just start to take actions on the mixes. Do this and trust me, you will have more information and more understanding than watching this video 10 times over. Alright guys, so that'll be it for this video. If you did like this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and also enable notifications so that you don't miss out when the next video drops. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.